Hi out there, all my brothers and sisters. Welcome to Willie's World. This is Willie. And this is Willie's World podcast, episode 2019-06, entitled Democratic Socialism, What a Fool Believes He Sees. I think What a Fool Believes He Sees is the perfect anthem for progressives in that their ideologies never seem to be reflected in the reality that they try to ignore and reinvent. Anyway, it's been a tough week. I just tried to wrap my mind around the Green New Deal, flatulating cows and the whole 9 yards, and frankly, my mind's temporarily blown. So if you would forgive me, I need to take a short break here with the Doobie Brothers and, well, a Doobie. And I'll be right back, and enjoy the Doobie Brothers, or fast forward if you like. I'll be back shortly. Okay, feeling a little better now. My brain's starting to settle down. Hey, by the way, did any of you happen to watch the House Judiciary Committee's interview with the acting Attorney General, Matthew Whitaker, talk about a man amongst children, like little Lilliputians. Boy, did they ever make the Democratic members of the committee ever make themselves look like jerks? One stands out. One stands out, and this is This is Representative Hakeem Jeffries, and he's talking to the Attorney General of the United States. We're all trying to figure out, who are you? Where did you come from? And how the heck did you become the head of the Department of Justice, said Hakeem Jeffries. When Whitaker tried to respond, the New York Democrat interrupted, Mr. Whitaker, that was a statement, not a question. I assume you know the difference. My question is, who the hell is Hakeem Jeffries? And how did he get, who voted for him? Anyway, in the next loop, we have Brian Kilmeade of Fox News interviewing Peter Cash, who's a former professor at the Wharton School of Finance. And he's being asked about, are the millennials suddenly going to go towards socialism at massive levels? And reassuringly to me, and I feel better now, he says absolutely not. And one of the things he mentioned is that in his experience studying these phenomena, that when millennials start working and paying taxes to the government, they tend to be capitalists because they want more of their own money. He also emphasizes that the secret is just teaching students what capitalism and socialism really are, and that's of course a huge part of it. And of course, the progressive education is a huge problem. Anyway, here we have Peter Cash interviewed by Brian Mead.
We renew our resolve that America will never be a socialist country.
President Trump rebuking socialism in the State of the Union address. Can you believe he had to do that? Drawing loud cheers and even a standing ovation from Republicans. But as young adults move more favorable view of socialism than they do capitalism, does that scare you? Is it trouble for the country? Let's ask former adjunct professor at the Wharton School of Business, Dr. Peter Cash. He taught entrepreneurship for more than 20 years in many countries. All right, Peter, do you believe that this generation is scared of capitalism and is embracing socialism?
No, I don't. Actually, it's sort of like politics. They call a conservative a mug liberal. A capitalist becomes a socialist who has to pay taxes. Once the millennials start paying taxes in cities that they have high tax rates, it's very quickly they tend to favor capitalism.
But yet people under 35 tend to think that the rich have too much. Like you say, AOC, we see her saying, billionaires are freeloaders. Rich people essentially cheated their way to the top. That seems to be the mindset. Do you find that in the college kids?
Absolutely not. When you teach college kids in an open environment, anywhere in the world, by the way, America is the envy of the world. Capitalism is a machine. It's a way of life. The first pilgrims that came here in the 17th century were entrepreneurs. They were risk takers. All throughout our 300, almost close to 300 years, entrepreneurship has been our machine.
Right, but Peter, you have somebody who says, if you vote for me, free preschool, free college, Medicare for all, and we're going to tax billionaires 70 to 90% of what they earn. That's not the mindset of the people you're speaking about.
That is correct. That's because they're not given the information. Let me just give you a couple of quick statistics. Today, about 50% of Americans give to charity, more than probably any other country in the world. We gave over $400 billion last year to charity. Take a guy like Chuck Feeney. Chuck Feeney started duty-free shops around the world. He accumulated a wealth of $8 billion. Brian, he gave away all $8 billion while he's still alive at 87 and has $2 million left. He is what I call a social capitalist. And I believe that these millennials will become social capitalists.
So they don't. It's not all about me. Not greed is good. Get money, spread it around as a choice, not a demand through taxing. Entrepreneurs. What did the Reagan tax cut do for entrepreneurship in this country?
Something amazing. I actually did the study myself. In 1982, if you looked at the Forbes 400, the 400 wealthiest families in America, about 68 to 70% got it through inheritance, real estate, or energy, oil. You go 20 years later, 2002, Brian, 50% of the Forbes 400, the wealthiest families in America started with less than $25,000. They were not born into this, they earned it.
Right, and that's what people have to understand. Go out there and compete.
Exactly.
Because we can't afford to support every single person. It's just not the way it works. Hasn't worked in any single country. Dr. Peter Cash, thanks so much.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, great to see you. Straight ahead.
Okay. Up next, we have one of my favorite podcasters, Dan Bongino, weighing in on the new socialism. And one of the things he points out is that this isn't just a couple of wacky ideas that some college professors have about socialism. This is rapidly becoming basically the Democratic Party's agenda platform for the next election. So we're talking about this is what you're going to get if the Democrats win, which is all of a sudden, blam, it's there. They're hard left. Their policies are hard left. And we better be prepared to defeat them. Dan Bongino points out that the repackaging of socialism involves not the government taking over everything by directly controlling the sources of the more means of production. They do it through taxes and regulation. So it's, hey, it's you own your company, but in fact they control it. So when it goes wrong, it's not the government's fault. It's the private ownership's fault. And he goes on to talk about the healthcare system, what's going to go on there, and it's basically going to be, since Obamacare failed miserably, let's go further hard left and just like everything, Medicare for all, that should fix it. Problem's been that the government wasn't involved enough. Well, of course, we all know that would be a much larger, horrible disaster than Obamacare was, which Obamacare should be a model for people about how does this stuff actually work. And then he goes on to talk about the Green New Deal, which is so bizarre that I have a hard time believing that these people are being taken seriously. But as bizarre as the more bizarre it gets, the more chances that it's actually going to happen. So, well, we have to point out the bizarreness and educate people. Here we go with Dan Bongino's take on the new democratic socialism.
Moving on. So there was an interesting piece in the Wall Street Journal this morning about socialism. And ladies and gentlemen, it's a topic that sadly has taken on new importance in the United States. There it is, who's afraid of socialism? Because we have this new far-left radical group of Democrats who are now of the Alexandria Cortez, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris model, who have been moving the Democrat Party from what was the Bill Clinton Democrat Leadership Committee Democrats over to the far left, back into the socialist camp, where they've gone on and off for the last few decades. But I think when we talk about socialism, we tend to talk about it in a almost esoteric, kind of ethereal, like otherworldly way. We don't hammer it down what they really mean. And the Journal does a good job this morning of talking about exactly what this new Democrat socialist agenda means for you and how it's going to hurt. So I'm going to pin this down for you, and I'm going to put together some bullet points about how dangerous this lurch is for you. But first, I want to describe what this new form of socialism is for them and how we got here. Socialism is the government control of the means of production. Now, Kevin Williamson, who I'm not sure where he's writing for, and I think he's back at National Review. There was a big scandal with him at the Atlantic. It doesn't involve him. It involved the people at the Atlantic losing their minds. That's a whole other story. But he had a book I read a while ago. Forgive me, I forget the title. I always screw it up, like The Idiot's Guide to Socialism or something like that. But it's a good book. And I read it. And in the book, we've mentioned it often. It's up there with The Black Swan, even though Williamson's not a huge fan of mine. I can't, listen, it's good work, whatever. But in the book, he writes about how after the collapse of the Soviet Union, this is an important point, folks, this is critical, right? After the collapse of the Soviet Union, it was very difficult for any Democrat, even though they believed that socialism worked and it was just it was only the people in the Soviet Union that blew it, Joe. Socialism's not a bad idea. It was just the idiots that implemented it. Williamson makes the point that the collapse of the Soviet Union in such a devastating, open, newsworthy fashion made it very difficult for any mainstream Democrat to get out in front of the TV screen and say what Democrats are saying now. People like Cortez and Sanders said, oh, socialism's great. Really? Because these people in the Soviet Union are starving. Right. It made it difficult to do that, and your political capital would go down dramatically. So Williamson makes an interesting point in his book. It's an older book. That the Democrats shifted to a new form of socialism. And the new form of socialism is this. Let's not argue for a government takeover of the economy, which is what socialism is. Socialism, by definition, is the government control of the means of production. The means of production are the economic levers that produce refrigerators, medicine, everything. The government controls those means of production in socialism. Controls who works there, controls who becomes a doctor, who pays the doctor, what you're paid. That is what it is. It is hard tyranny. It is economic and political tyranny. The Democrats could no longer do that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, so they argued for this new form of socialism, which was a brilliant point I thought Williamson made, that, Joe, why control the means of production outright if you could de facto do it? Don't de jure do it, de facto do it. In other words, if the government, the United States government, were to tomorrow declare that we are now a socialist economy, all of your business is our business, Bongino Inc. is now, which is a real company we own, is now owned by the U.S. government. You will work for us and we will dictate what you're paid. Then what happens, Joe? Bongino Inc. would go under remark because I'm not working for the government.
Right.
And then who's to blame? The government.
Sure.
And that's what happened in the Soviet Union. When the government took over nail production factories, car production factories, and the Russian Lada, the car fell apart, people eventually blamed the government for their economic deprivation because the government was in charge. That's what socialism is. The new socialism is the government control of the means of production by controlling the taxes and controlling the regulatory framework. It's a genius way to do it, Joe.
Bingo.
Think about it, right? The government doesn't have to outright confiscate your business if they tax the hell out of it and regulate it to death. I don't need to own, as a government official, Joe Armacost Inc. if Joe has to give me all his money through taxes and Joe has to follow an extensive rule book that I laid out. He doesn't have to do that. He doesn't have to do that. All he has to do is work for me by default because he's already giving me his money and he's already subscribing to a series of rules.
Right.
That I laid out. You get what I'm saying? Therefore, what's the benefit of that? If Joe's business fails, then the new socialists who haven't outright confiscated the business, who do they blame? They blame Joe. Look, Joe's business failed. It wasn't our fault. We don't own it. Joe owns it. Joe doesn't own it. Joe owns it in name only.
Right.
He's an oino, an owner in name only. That is the new socialism. Oh, like a rhino, but an oino. An owner in name only. Now, think about it, right? Where was new socialism implemented almost perfectly until a monkey wrench got thrown in? You may remember this, Joe. We did a Sunday show. We were only doing once-a-week shows on this very topic.
Yeah.
Obamacare. Why take over the healthcare system outright if you can tax and regulate it to death? That's what Obamacare was. New regulations. You must subscribe to the community rating. You must subscribe to the guaranteed issue provisions. You will issue these types of policies that do these things. If you don't buy this, you will pay an individual mandate tax. There was the medical device tax. This was a form of the new socialism. Let's not take over the system outright, but let's in turn let the insurance companies exist. And by letting them exist, we'll tax and regulate them to death. And what happened, Joe? The plan was to let the insurance companies fail, to be able to blame them, to then move in to introduce an even bigger government footprint in the system. But what happened? What was the monkey wrench? The monkey wrench was the system was so bad and Obamacare failed so badly. The website didn't work. Premiums went sky high quicker than they expected, that the public backlash made it unavoidable for the media to avoid the story. And in their attempt, remember, what were the Democrats going to do? They were going to blame Armacost Inc., Armacost Health Insurance. Look, it wasn't us. We don't own the health insurance companies. Joe does. All we did was institute these taxes and regulations. It's not our fault he can't comply. But the backlash was so severe that the media was forced to cover it as a failure of Obamacare, and it blew up in their faces. The first experiment in new socialism blew up. So now what are they back to, Joe? Now they're moving back to just outright old socialism in and of itself. Let's go through the bullet points one by one in the Wall Street Journal today, right?
More aggression.
On the healthcare front, instead of the just standard regulation of the healthcare insurance industry through Obamacare, they are now advocating for Medicare for all. Medicare for all, make no mistake, is a bureaucratic government-run healthcare system that would abandon and make illegal private healthcare. Now, it's not full-blown traditional Soviet socialism with regard to the fact that there will still be doctors and hospitals that are allowed to exist as private entities in some respect.
Need them.
In other words, if they want, but having said that, they will be paid by the government, have rules for payment dictated by the government, and the government will effectively, through, again, de facto socialism, dictate the majority of how their business practices are implemented. So it's a move towards the left, even farther away from the Obamacare initial new socialism agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, you understand Medicare for all is really a system to eliminate and make illegal private health care in this country, which will directly impact you. I hope you understand that. Secondly, how again, we're talking about this. This is the folks, I can't emphasize this enough. This is the actual Democrat agenda. This is not nonsensical stuff or right-wing talking points I'm making up. These are things people have been on the record about.
Right.
Bernie Sanders introduced a Medicare for all bill in the United States Senate that had 16 co-sponsors on the Democrat side. A Medicare for all bill that would wipe out your insurance plan. That really happened. You can look it up yourself. Oh, you're fear-mongering. I'm just telling you what happened. The Democrat New Socialist agenda is moving back towards the old socialist agenda, which is more and more government control of components of your life. Healthcare is number one. Number two, our energy production business. Ocasio-Cortez, conveniently this morning, this woman cannot be ignored. Representative Cortez has accumulated quite a following amongst the economically illiterate. She introduced this morning an absurd, outrageous, nonsensical, mathematically and arithmetically impossible Green New Deal. The Green New Deal dictates a carbon neutral economy within the next 10 years. Now, Joe, how is she going to do that?
Do tell.
Do tell, through government implementation of mandates that will dictate that we move away from energy sources we have now to non-carbon sources. In other words, in regular, rational, reasonable American speak, that would mean dumping gasoline, petrochemicals, coal, natural gas, and others for solar power and wind. Yes, which is in 10 years. Now, you may say, oh, well, that sounds like a great idea, Dan, does it? Because as the Journal indicates this morning, non-carbon energy currently produces a whopping 11% of our energy supply. So how you propose we are going to increase that from 11% to 100% in 10 years without the infrastructure, technology, or even energy thermodynamics to do so is beyond me. But because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez got elected to Congress, she thinks she has the cerebral brain power somehow to dictate to our entire energy industry how they're going to come up with the other 89% in 10 years. What are they going to do? Mandate a wind turbine on everybody's roof?
What is she doing? What is she doing?
What is she doing back there?
What is she doing?
Again, the new socialism. You don't have to own the energy industry. You just have to dictate them through taxes and regulation how they're going to operate. And then when they fail, you just blame it on them. Third, so first, they want to take over the healthcare industry. Again, already proposed and voted on. Second, they want to take over the energy industry. Oh, you're fear-mongering. Really? Did you read the bill this morning? The agenda? It's not the bill, the agenda, the Green New Deal she's putting forward? This is an elected member of Congress with very real power. Did you miss that? She's fear-mongering, not us. We're just telling you the truth. Yeah. Third, they want to dramatically gain control and a government foothold, camel's nose under the tent, into the American workforce to an even more significant degree than they are now. They want to do a federal jobs guarantee. A jobs guarantee, meaning everybody is guaranteed some job backed by federal government dollars at a, quote, living wage. Ladies and gentlemen, think about that. If the federal government now hires everyone who doesn't have a job, why would you go and look for another job in the free market economy where value is being added? Ladies and gentlemen, the government doesn't add value. I've had some people email me and object to this. They say the government adds value. Folks, the constitutional republic, as implemented by our Constitution, our founding documents, understood that there is nothing the government do that the free market can't do better. Nothing. Nothing. Now, the reason we accept financial asymmetries and government spending in terms of our military and our court system in the Constitution is because the incentives for a private court system or a private military, even though they're less economically efficient, are damaging. You don't want a bunch of mercenaries running around starting wars to get a pay raise. Some would argue some lobbyists are doing that now. Mm-hmm. So we have a military, thankfully, filled with American patriots who if you're a listener to the show, you know I have the deepest and most profound respect for, and I sincerely mean that from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for what you do for relatively little money. It's amazing. But understand that we accept the financial asymmetries there because we have to with regard to the military and the court system. There is nothing the government does that adds value more than can be done in a free market economy. Milton Friedman's old line, when the government spends other people's money on other people, which is what the government does, it takes money from you and gives it to someone else, neither cost nor quality matter because it's not their money and they're not even buying what they're buying for themselves. I had a woman email me, and I appreciate your feedback, saying, hey, I work for the government. We provide this analysis for roads. Thank you. I appreciate your feedback. I'm not knocking you. I worked for the government in the Secret Service. There are good people there. I left. There are good folks there. And I'm not suggesting what they do isn't valuable in the law enforcement function. I'm suggesting to you that the value added, well, law enforcement's separate. I should include them with the military because obviously the incentives would be perverse there too. But when you start talking about traffic control mechanisms, the free market economy is obviously motivated by spending their own money on themselves to increase the cost and quality of those mechanisms. I bring all this up in light of the federal jobs guarantee because the more people we pull out of a private economy that has an incentive by spending their own money on themselves where cost and quality matter and put them in the federal workforce where cost and quality don't matter, because you're spending other people's money on other people, the more efficiency we lose out of the economy. This is a real proposal, the jobs guarantee, included in a lot of these Green New Deal type agenda items.
Duh.
This is really happening. We're not making this up. All right, I got a few more, the new socialism. This is real. It's not a joke. Before we get to that, final read today from a great company. They sent me a couple samples of their shirts, and my wife loves them, really loves them. You ever have that problem, Joe, when you untuck a dress shirt? They have the cuts on the side, and it just never looks right.
Right.
Well, Untuckit's figured that out. No guy looks good in a long, bulky dress shirt when it's untucked. You look like you got a poncho on. Come on, we all know it looks terrible. You might think it looks casual, but really it does look sloppy. I can't stand that look. That's because they were never meant to be worn that way. Old school dress shirts were meant to be tucked in. But Untuckit makes shirts specifically designed to be worn untucked, and man, do these shirts look spectacular. I got 2 of them. They look great. I should take a photo, put it on my Instagram. For that clean, casual look that's not too long or not too short, you can even wear it at the office, you need Untuckit. They have more than 50 fit combinations, athletic type fits, slim fits. It works out great. Untuckit shirts look great on tall, short, slim, and athletic guys of all ages. Go to untuckit.com or visit one of Untuckit's 50 stores across the U.S. and Canada. Untuckit even offers free shipping and returns on all orders in the U.S. Use promo code Bongino for 20% off your first purchase. That's promo code Bongino for 20% off your first purchase. So if you want the perfect fitting shirt, regardless of your shape or size, try the original untucked shirt. You will never look better. Get one for Valentine's Day. Go out with your loved one there. You'll look sharp. And remember, use promo code Bongino for 20% off your first purchase at untuckit.com. That's UNTUCKIT.com, untuckit.com, promo code Bongino for 20% off. Okay. Getting back to the socialism dilemma. Ladies and gentlemen, this is real. I wanted to make this bleed for you today. I wanted to put some skin on this. I wanted to make sure we're not having these, again, otherworldly intellectual arguments that don't have real world consequences. I just laid out to you in healthcare, the Green New Deal in the energy arena, in the workforce space, how the government is moving in and encroaching on your life and increasingly taking away your freedom in a zero-sum battle for liberty. Liberty is zero-sum. Your money, your choices, and your healthcare choices cannot belong to you and the government at the same time, folks. Either you are making your healthcare decisions and spending your money on yourself, your business, and your family, or the government is. Those two spaces can't coexist at the same time. It is a continuum. More government, less individual freedom. Less government, more individual freedom. This is not a hard concept to figure out.
Not at all.
Another area where socialism is encroaching on your life in a very real, tangible way. Elizabeth Warren, candidate for president, who was busted again yesterday for declaring herself an American Indian on her Texas bar application. She is not American Indian in any kind of tribal significant way. She did it clearly at this point to get ahead. Elizabeth Warren is proposing a federal charter for companies earning $1 billion or more. A federal charter. So now we want government bureaucrats who can't even get government right, government bureaucrats who have no expertise at all in even governing, who have zero expertise in running billion-dollar businesses, to be managing through a federal charter billion-dollar businesses to ensure they operate according to federal principles. If this isn't the new socialism, Joe, I don't know what is.
They're with the government. They're qualified.
For what? They're not, you and I both know they're not qualified for anything.
No.
So you want government bureau, again, the new social, why own the business outright? If you can move in on Apple and Microsoft and other businesses, if you can just move in and dictate to their board through a federal charter how they're going to operate, what better way to roll? Make sure that they invest, Joe, in social justice programs and elsewhere. I can see it coming now. Millions and millions of dollars for activist groups that promote left-leaning causes. Because why? The federal charter says it's so.
Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, these are real consequences in the real world. These are real proposals. This is not a joke. On the economic front, the federal government encroaching in your life. I just showed you the very simple to understand continuum. Individual liberty, government power. We give up some individual liberty through financing our taxes through a constitutional role of the republic. We give up some of our individual liberty based on things we can and can't do. We obviously can't commit certain crimes. We can't because we vote on people who vote on laws. But understand, as the government takes more of your money and implements new rules, there's no power in yes, as Chuck Ecker once told me. Chuck Ecker, Howard County executive in Maryland, once said to me, government power constantly increases and the bureaucracy grows because there is absolutely no power in yes. There is only power in the government in telling people no. When you tell people no, they have to come back to you to lobby you to get to yes.
Yep.
There is no power in an initial yes. So what do? In order to get people to get to yes, we tax the snot out of them and we implement a bunch of tax loopholes that have to be lobbied for. So you need a favor, you're paying a 70% tax rate. You walk into your local government official, hey, I'm getting crushed in my business with this tax rate. Hey, we're going to make a loophole for your blue t-shirt business or whatever it may be. That's why the implementation of high tax rates works for the government. It enables government bureaucrats to get the lobbyists in their office to make and empower them to get them to yes. Then they use the lobbyists later for jobs when they get out of office. This is an invirtuous circle of stupid that never seems to end. The tax rates on the personal front, it is more money out of your wallet. Ladies and gentlemen, these are real plans. I wrote down 3 of them. Bernie Sanders is now proposing upping the tax rate, the death tax, to 77%. So keep in mind, you've saved your entire life to hand off some assets to your children that you've paid taxes on, capital gains taxes, income taxes, payroll taxes. You've accumulated post-tax money you want to leave off to your kids in the form of capital, assets, and money. And now Bernie Sanders wants 77% of that. Again, new socialism. I don't have to own you, but if I own your ability to economically get ahead and pass on some form of wealth to your children, I own you anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Representative Cortez proposing a 70% top marginal tax rate for people making $10 million or more. You may say, well, that's not going to affect me. No, it is going to affect you because, as I've stated to you multiple times, her plan is economically unfeasible. She's promoting $40+ trillion in new spending, $4 trillion a year in new spending, with only $200 billion via this tax at most to pay for it. Of course this is going to affect you. Either she's ignorant or she's lying. There's no money in a 10 millionaire tax to pay for $40 trillion in new spending. Not even close. The real money in America is with the middle class. She knows that. Elizabeth Warren proposing a 2% wealth tax on assets. Assets, money you've already paid taxes on. The 2% annual tax on your assets if you make a certain amount of money. Again, ladies and gentlemen, real socialism in real time trying to be implemented in the very real United States of America. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, Schumer and Bernie Sanders are promoting another plan now to limit stock buybacks. Folks, this is absurd. You know, I understand. I got a nice email from a guy who does some good work in finance. It was a good email talking about the float and how stock buybacks benefit executives within a company who are paid in stock. I get it. I understand that. No one's suggesting any form of compensation comes without risk to shareholders. Nobody. Obviously, if you're going to pay people in pure income, you don't know how they're going to be motivated. It may be some form of a lifetime employment, and they're not really worried about the stock price. They take a cushy job, whatever it may be. There's always, you pay them in form of capital gains, of stocks. Of course, they're going to have an incentive to up the strike price they got it at. And there's always a down and an upside to any form of compensation. But Bernie Sanders and Chuck Schumer are promoting, they wrote an op-ed in the New York Times the other day to limit stock buybacks. So now you want companies to do what? When they can't figure out anything to do with their money, to buy a bunch of low-return assets and keep a bunch of cash hoards lying around? Hoards, folks. Don't email me that with a RDS at the end. Cash hoards laying around, that's what you want? How do you think people who are invested in these stocks, pension funds, are going to feel by Chuck Schumer dictating to a company how they can manage their own assets? This is insane. This is very real and happening right now in the United States. This is real socialism. So to sum up, here's the penalty for you. They want to control your health care through Medicare for all, the energy industry through this Green New Deal, the jobs workforce through a jobs guarantee, how businesses are run, successful businesses through a federal charter. They want to control your income through increased tax rates and even a death tax, a higher death tax. And now they want to control how major companies manage their own investment decisions. The new socialism. If all of this is implemented, they don't have to own those companies outright and confiscate the means of production, because they already would. They would be taxing and regulating them to death. And that way, when the companies fail, they won't blame socialism. They'll blame those companies. All right, last story of the day.
The last loop I thought was interesting was Tucker Carlson of Fox. He was interviewing Dr. Cornel West. I think he's out of Princeton. And one of the more, I think, reasonable minds out there as far as socialism and related matters. And he has some reasonable ideas about borders and prisons. Not that there shouldn't be any borders or prisons, but that, of course, they could be managed differently. And when he talks about human rights and the preservation of the dignity of all human beings, it's hard to argue with that. It's just that the implementation of these ideas goes so badly. But I think Cornel West is one of the saner folks out there, and I thought I'd put in a little of the saner people commenting about this sudden dramatic rise in the interest of socialism. So here we go, Dr. Cornel West.
You've heard the phrase a lot lately, democratic socialist. It's suddenly very common on the left. Bernie Sanders has called himself a democratic socialist. So has New York congressional candidate Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's the woman that the DNC chair, Tom Perez, recently said this about.
She represents the future of our party. Alexandria's victory was just a remarkable reminder of the depth that we have in the Democratic Party.
Okay, so democratic socialism is the future, but what is democratic socialism? We thought it'd be worth pausing for a minute to find out. Democratic socialism is not, by the way, a wing of the Democratic Party, at least not yet. It's an entirely separate movement with its own national organization, the Democratic Socialists of America. 2 years ago, the DSA endorsed Bernie Sanders and opposed Donald Trump, but did not endorse Hillary Clinton. So at times, it has been antagonistic to the Democratic Party. What do democratic socialists believe? There's no formal platform, but the outlines are pretty clear. Democratic socialists support socialism, state ownership of major industries. That would include healthcare, technology, manufacturing. Some of them explicitly support communism. The co-chair of Portland, Oregon's chapter of the DSA recently tweeted this, quote, "As a DSA chapter co-chair, I just want to set the record straight for a minute. Communism is good." But democratic socialism is about more than economics. The DSA's official Twitter account demands reparations for African Americans in the form of free and open enrollment at public colleges, retroactive forgiveness of student loans, and a guaranteed lifetime minimum income. The DSA has also called for an end to all immigrant deportations everywhere in the United States. In New York, the DSA has demanded the abolition of profits, prisons, cash bail, and borders. Not all democratic socialists have the same views on everything, but that gives you some idea. Unlimited, uncontrolled immigration into the U.S., coupled with race-based reparations, the abolition of prisons, and by extension, law and order itself, and a massive expansion of the welfare state financed by an economic system that does not recognize profit. How would that work exactly? Has it ever worked in any country in the world? Those suddenly seem like relevant questions. At this pace, a democratic socialist could get the Democratic nomination at some point and be elected president. So we thought it was a perfect moment to speak to possibly the most famous of all advocates for democratic socialism, Cornel West. He's a professor at Harvard. He's an honorary co-chair of the Democratic Socialists of America, and he joins us tonight. Cornel, thank you for coming on.
No, thank you, and it's good to be in dialogue with you once again, though, brother.
Yes, it is. So to give us some sense of what democratic socialism is, can you point to an example, an extant example of it that works? Venezuela seems like an example of democratic socialism. Would you say that it is? And if so, does it work?
No, I don't think that democratic socialism as an ideal has been able to be embodied in a larger social context. There's different forms of it. Some are bad, some are medium, some are better. But the fundamental commitment is to the dignity of ordinary people and to make sure they can live lives of decency. So it's not an ism, no, brother. It's about decency. It's about fairness. It's about the accountability of the powerful vis-a-vis those who have less power. At the workplace, women dealing with the household, gays, lesbians, trans, black people, indigenous peoples, immigrants. How do we ensure that they are treated decently and that the powerful don't in any way manipulate, subjugate, and exploit them?
Well, I mean, if that's what democratic socialism is, then I'm basically on board. I do think that ordinary people, middle-class people, ought to have dignity. And I think that our current systems make it hard for them to have dignity. So I agree with all of that. But the details
matter. That's precisely why, Albert Einstein, Helen Keller, Norman Thomas, Eugene Debs, Martin Luther King Jr., Ella Baker. We can go on and on. They're all democratic socialists. Michael Harrington, one of the great founders of Democratic Socialism of America. I've been a member for 36 years.
I understand. But has it struck you as interesting that it's never actually worked anywhere? So the question is not what are our goals. Our goals are the same. How do we get there is the question. So what happened in Venezuela? They call that democratic socialism, but they don't have toilet paper. And it's less equal than ever.
But part of the problem is, though, brothers, that any time there's been the attempts of ordinary people to engage in self-determination, they can get crushed by external nations. Look at U.S. policies toward Venezuela has been very, very ugly. Nicaragua in the same way. We saw that in so many other instances where countries tried to engage in self-determination and they either get crushed, they either get coerced and they end up oftentimes responding to that kind of authoritarian treatment. So we've never had a chance to really pull it off. So it's only been a movement so far. It's an attempt to resist the greed at the top, the racism, the sexism, the homophobia, the various ways in which humanity is violated rather than affirmed.
So here's just to the details quickly. The DSA of New York, which is certainly one of the biggest in the country, recently
and
said...
thank God for Sister Alexandria. She's my dear sister and comrade. Absolutely.
So they said that they're against borders, profits, and prisons. What would a country without prisons look like? What would you do with murderers, for example, or rapists? Where would you put them with no prisons?
Well, I mean, when they say prisons, they're talking about the kinds of prisons we have at the present. If you have sites of rehabilitation, education, ways in which transformation can take place, you and I ourselves, you're Episcopalian, I'm Baptist, we're Christians, right? We believe all human beings made not just an image of God, but they can be changed, they can be transformed when the right kind of intervention takes place. That's what people mean in the socialist movement when they talk about the elimination of the kind of prisons that are in place.
So what they really mean is better prisons.
And rapists
Maybe they should
and others.
be more... Okay, so what about borders, though?
You can have isolation, you can have distance, but you don't give up on them. And most importantly, you don't view them in the vicious through the lens of being less than human, that they can bounce back, they can be better.
So if a government's obligation is to its own citizens, and you drop the borders and have no border enforcement at all, what would happen to this country? What would happen to the poor people in this country? Would their lives get better? Would they become more prosperous? No. This country would become poorer, dirtier, impossible to manage. It would be flooded with the poor of the world, and it would destroy our country instantly. So why would you say no borders?
Well, I mean, again, no, you got a variety of voices in the Democratic Socialists of America. We like a jazz orchestra. You got different perspectives and orientations. We all don't agree on one particular policy all the time. This is true in terms of Israeli occupation of Palestinians. Some are in the middle, some are much more critical, like myself. The question is, how do you keep track of the rich humanity of Mexican brothers and sisters, of those coming from Latin America, those coming from Africa, those coming from Haiti, and those coming from Europe and Asia? That's the important thing. We know the history of America, other than indigenous peoples and Africans who've been enslaved, was to open the borders, to bring folk in, to allow people to gain access. But it's not a matter of no borders at all. It's a matter of how do you ensure that their dignity is affirmed when they arrive so that you don't end up having the kind of neo-fascist policies of the Trump administration separating these precious children from their mothers and fathers.
That's silly, as you well know. But how do you think that the descendants of Americans... But hold on. How do you think the descendants of American slaves benefit when you bring in 25 million illegal immigrants from the third world? Does that elevate poor Americans? I don't see any evidence that they get richer or happier when you bring in more poor people. You ignore their problems. That's why we don't pay any attention to their problems
anymore. My dear brother, but if we were having this discussion 100 years ago and you had millions of people coming from Jew-hating Europe, Irish-hating Britain, and Ireland, I mean, all the folk who came into the making of slices of this nation, did it not allow for the kind of coming together in which poor and working people would be able to straighten their backs up and speak with dignity and decency about issues that affect all of us? That's the history of the nation, with the exception of the African slaves and the precious indigenous peoples. So the idea that somehow now that the immigrants are here, and a lot of the immigrants who've only been here one or two generations now become the definitive authority defining what it is to be an American. How hypocritical can you get? I've been here 9 generations coming out of enslaved people, and I can still embrace my Mexican brothers and sisters. I can embrace a whole host of others coming from around the world. But it's not just a matter of no borders. I don't believe in just no borders myself. It's a question of making sure their dignity is affirmed when they get here.
Then you got to get a hold of the DSA of New York's Twitter account, because they're saying some pretty reckless
we got a number of voices in DSA. I love them. We believe in disagreement. We believe in disagreement. You were just talking about disagreement in terms of defending civil liberties. I believe in protecting civil liberties. Yours, mine, Page's, Bernie Sanders, Mumia Abu-Jabal's, a whole host of folk. But we have to be consistent. It can't just be right-wing.
You always lose me at the end, Cornell. Thank you so much for coming on. I hope you will come back. Cornell West.
Okay, there's my first foray into figuring out what the heck the socialism business is all about, and we're all going to have to get up to speed pretty fast because the campaigning for the 2020 election has already started. And try to imagine if the Democrats win, and they actually try to implement all these far-left radical ideas that are becoming a central part of their platform. How frightening is that? How frightening is it to think about going back 2 years ago, what would happen if Hillary won? Good God Almighty! So let's face it, this could happen if nobody tries to stop it. So we have to make sure that these nut jobs don't end up running our country, and of course we'll win because it's our country. Anyway, so I'll probably comment some more on socialism in the next podcast because it's a pretty big topic and it ain't going away anytime soon. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.